Welcome back to Beyond Ray Season 3. I'm Ginger. I'm also joined by Kate and Margaret. This season, we're exploring the idea that products and society shape each other and whether the designer behind the product matters. Today, we talk to Dr. Jude Glover about the impact that sex, pleasure, and educational products have on users' view of bodily autonomy, sexual expression, and health. Today on the podcast, we're super thrilled to bring Dr. Judith Glover from the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. She is a design educator, designer of all kinds of fantastic products like sex toys. She is an advocate for people with disabilities. And we're so thrilled to have her on the show to talk about a lot of stuff that people are honestly a little afraid to talk about. Hello, welcome from Australia. Your summer and mid-morning are winter evening.
Yes, we're going into summer. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so I think one of the first things that we're so curious about is that you've had an interest in sex toys and intimate products for a long time. Where did that start? Like, why did you take an interest in it, and what did you notice about the industry?
Back in the 90s, so when I was in my 20s, I was actually a metal worker. Come out of art school, and then I went to get a trade, and that trade was what we call boiler making, metal fabrication. I taught myself blacksmithing. I was a maker, and I was a creative person. And it really came through just meeting somebody. So it came through a very personal experience. So I met this person that became my partner. I would have been in, I don't know, 25, 26 or something like that. And then, the first time we go to have sex, she pulls out this dildo, which I put in my thesis. It's the Doc Johnson 6-inch dong. It's a very famous mass-produced dildo by Cal Exotics. And as you can imagine, it's just like it's a plastic pink veiny thing. And all it is a sheath, and it's hollow inside. So I assume supposed to stick your fingers up it to control it. Anyway, and she pulls this out, and I'm like, what the hell's going on? We're lesbians, and also, what is this? Like, this is ugly. What is this for kind of like product values? Anyway, she kind of said, look, just shut up, whatever, get on with it. But afterwards, it got me thinking. I was like, I'll go buy a better one. If she wants to use sex toys and let's start using sex toys, I'll go buy a better one. And then so we went off to a very typical sex shop back in the 90s. There were no better ones. Mm. And then I was like, hey, what the hell is going on with this industry? And that sparked my interest. As I kept working as a metal worker, but it's a very, very physical industry. And I thought, look, if I keep going, I'll probably got about 10 years. I'll be 40 and then I'll have to change careers. So I'm best to change careers now. And I thought, well, how do you make sex toys? And so if I'd been business orientated, I would have gone off and done a business degree. But because I was a creative person, I was like, I'm going to go be an industrial designer. And when I turned up, so I moved states, I moved down to Melbourne to a couple of really good industrial design schools down here. And I didn't tell them when I turned up to the interview that I wanted to make sex toys. I waited till fourth year when it was like, hey, what are you going to do for your major project? Your capstone. Oh, I'm going to create a sex toy company. So I waited. And by that stage, I'd already prototyped the ceramic dildo, which became the first product. And so I got dragged into the head of department's office, and he was like, well, he was a bit of a kind of a stuck-up Englishman who couldn't say the word dildo without having a bit of a giggle. And he was just like, oh, do you really have to do this? And, and I had all the answers at that point, which was, well, the whole point, I think they were just afraid I was going to do something like the Doc Johnson 6-inch dong. And I'm saying, no, I want to do the opposite. I want to actually approach this from what is missing is industrial design in this field, or a big part of what's missing is industrial design. And the way that we approach contemporary markets, particularly for females. We take a contemporary view of it. And the porn industry, which sex toys had come out of, they were taking a very narrow view of what a female was. And it tended to be, naughty nurse or something like that, sexy stripper pole, that sort of stuff. And there is an element of theatre to sex, but I think a lot of women approach buying a sex toy like they would approach buying a handbag or a pair of shoes or a phone. In fact, a lot of women want it to match that ecosystem of objects in their lives. So that's how I got started in fourth year. I said, I'm going to create a sex toy company. And I took that all the way through to a PhD and ended up in this space that I call design and sexual health innovation, because postdoctorally, I was like, there's as many problems within kind of medical or allied health as there are within sort of the recreational use. There's the recreational use and there's sexual health and well-being, but then there's actual people who have actual problems. They can't get it up, or they have vaginismus or something like that. And then the medical field also has trouble dealing with these things. And it always comes back to those very stuck and long-standing views around those things that you're talking about, how we have trouble talking about what I loosely call the bits downstairs, and then how that relates to our identity.
I'm really curious, when you were starting the project in college, what were some of the initial findings you identified that you were like, we really want it actually to be more focused on these details rather than it looking phallic or it being sort of dirty, right? Like, what are some of the initial details? And then where do you land now with that same product? Like, what have you learned sort of in the process?
Well, as you guys know, being industrial designers yourselves, I mean, there's always a technical aspect. That's why industrial design is so interesting, right? There's a technical aspect to it that's quite fascinating to resolve, to make something work, to make it work well. Then objects have meanings. They have sociocultural meanings. They also have technological meanings. I always say to my engineering students, that's the dark arts. That's what you need to learn and understand. How do you make somebody attracted to your product, but it's not like you've resolved the technical stuff, right? I think I said this the last time we talked. There's a really good example of Jay Mays when he headed up Ford. One of the biggest car companies in the world, was their global head designer. I think it was Ford at the time. And, and he'd got that job off the back of doing the new Beetle and all of that sort of stuff. And his story apparently is he said to the engineers, look, engineers don't sell cars. And all the engineers are like, but it's kind of true, right? We just take good engineering, we take good technology, we take it for granted. We really do. So then what does sell stuff? And the things that sell stuff is where we as industrial designers are told, this is your psychographic and demographic. This is the market. This is how you chop it up. We know that as simple as, let's take two shavers. One's called the Mach 5 for men. And it's based on, sports kind of aesthetics and racing car driving, and the Mach 5's the fast plane that flies. And then for women, it's called the Venus. It's all curvy and white and purple and all that sort of stuff.
And more expensive.
And more expensive, yeah.
Yes, and more expensive. Yeah, totally. And I always think if you look at the 20th century, it was this era where industrial design basically poofed into being somewhere, out of either in America, the ad industry, or in Europe, it sort of came out of the arts and crafts movements and stuff. Our role initially was to kind of make production better for people, whether it was just to kind of sell more stuff into more sort of demographics or psychographics. Post-World War II, you get these big companies like Braun and Philips get created, right? And it's this sort of decades of these famous male designers designing a lot of stuff for women in that kind of consumer marketplace, right? Mm. They never went into that sexuality space or sexual space. They never went, and they were the perfect companies to be designing vibrators. And I always sort of sit and daydream one day and I think, those beautiful, beautiful Braun shavers, the ones from like the 50s and 60s. Oh my God, they're so exquisite in terms of their detail and that perforated metal and beautiful proportions. The objects that should be in museums, they're so beautiful. And I'm sure they functioned exceptionally well. Can you imagine if the man hours that went into designing those things, can you imagine if even a smidge of that had been applied to Braun doing a decent vibrator, right? So you just go, okay, so why did the industrial design field abdicate the field? Because the porn industry filled a vacuum, which was that nobody else wanted to deal with those kind of topics around sexual practice. And even the term pornography is really loaded. And if you know a little bit about the social history of the 20th century, what I call the morality wars kind of raged across from late Victorianism through even now. They're going on now. And we just had a little bit of a brief chat around the election and so much and what's happening. And you never thought that Roe versus Wade would ever get overturned and any of this sort of stuff. So they're still really raging. The Comstock laws are still there and they can still be used, which is to arrest somebody for sending stuff through the post. So whether it be pornographic magazines or objects or whatever.
I'm curious, I want to add onto that a little bit that like these objects, when we talk about the background culture, from those morality wars, from the laws that were passed, these objects unfortunately have a lot of baggage. And when you're talking about these physical objects communicating values, how do you, as a designer, overcome the baggage? Because I think these products probably have more baggage than others, right? And then the porn industry added a lot of baggage. And it kind of keeps going. Like, how do you peel that back so that you convince, like, the stuffy head of department that these products need to be made, that something serious, academic, and good for society is being made?
Yeah, well, you treat them like normal products, right? I mean, sex toys are just products with a little bit of a twist around that demographic or psychographic. So I would suggest that there still needs to, particularly if you're making them for contemporary women, that there needs to be a sense of eroticism in them. There's some good examples of, like, when Philips tried to make some massages in the first decade of the 21st century. And I thought, in the end, I mean, they gave it a red hot go, right? And, if any company that should have been able to put something really good on the market, it should have been them. They've got all the proper R&D processes. But I think it kind of in the end became a little bit like design by committee. They just probably let the designers have their head and do what they wanted. They probably would have come out with something quite beautiful. But in the end, they came out looking like purple computer mouses, and there wasn't really anything kind of erotic around it. And part of their research was also, the male, they were couples devices, right? It's kind of like, well, the male doesn't want to be, like, if you bring out a big black dildo, right, you're having a heteronormative relationship, the guy may mostly get, like, a bit freaked out, like it's bigger than his thing or whatever. If guys are open-minded, they probably wouldn't care. Some you can flip them over and use it on them, but mostly, there was this research that they had, which was that, don't do anything that's going to freak the dude out. And I'm kind of like, come on, are we still there? We're still at that situation. Right. My understanding of, because I'm queer, and I've pretty much in my life mostly had sex with women, is that if the woman's happy, everybody's happy. I think in that couple's relationship, they should have been focusing on women's pleasure and consent, and trying to get the guy to come a bit on board with that. So there was nothing in their stuff which was around penetration. So it was all these sort of kind of massagey devices. But look, they did actually talk about the clitoris and focusing on the clitoris. They didn't completely desexualize the whole thing. But I think in terms of where the product design ended up, they desexualized it a bit. So I think the first bit, just from going back to that thing of, how can you change this? I think applying what we would just call normal stock standard industrial design process and methods, like what you get taught, what you apply every day in your job, what I teach to students, what I apply when I'm designing products. I think that is really important. But then in terms of, there's a psychological piece to it, right? If we go to some really basic theory like Donald Norman's theory, he talks about visceral behavioral and identity, I think it is. And I think identity is kind of the key, around that psychology bit of it. So what is that psychographic demographic? What do they want? What are they going to respond to? And in sex toys, there's going to be women that are going to be like, I want it to look like my iPhone. Why can't Apple make a decent vibrator? And I say that too. Stop worrying about an EV and make some decent vibrators for the ladies. They'd sell gazillions. And then there's another part to it, which is sex is theatre to some people. So some people, it's about having a different identity in the bedroom. So the market is not totally like when I say design them like other products, what I mean is design them with proper R&D processes, and design them for quality and proper design for manufacture, safety, ergonomics, all of that sort of stuff.
I'm also curious about the R&D process, though. Like, do you find that people are probably representing their experiences totally honestly? It's sort of a private region for them, right? So I'm curious about R&D, how you have to adjust to make people feel really safe, how you feel like you can get in to like that most intimate part of their lives.
I have to say, when I was designing my products, I was designing them for myself. And then I was kind of making them, prototyping, and then asking people, well, what do you think? And I thought, well, I'm probably representative of no, you're never going to design something that's going to suit everybody in the world, right? Everything that we do is going to be of a niche market of a certain size. I found when my honours students, when they tackle these projects and they go and they talk to their friends and all that sort of stuff after they do their ethics applications and stuff, I think they're getting people to be fairly honest if you're asking people anonymously.
Nice.
I also wanted to bring it back to the Philips example because I think that's a great example of a company, obviously huge company known for all kinds of products, but also known extensively for healthcare products. And I wanted to know more about how you brought in the health and medicine aspect to your interests and the products that you work on, when did that get introduced, and how is it different than initially working on products for sexual pleasure?
So after I finished my PhD and I was doing lots of sessional teaching, and then a position came up at where I was doing sessional teaching at RMIT, and I was encouraged to apply for it. I got that position. Then, my bosses sat me down and said, right, what's your research career going to look like? And I'm like, Jesus, I don't know. So I had to think about it. And then I just started going to kind of things that interested me, which were health conferences, particularly around female stuff, and sex and disability. There was a bit of that going on in Melbourne at the time. And I just started meeting particularly people in allied health, so OTs, physios, who were interested in this space. And so, there's quite different problems there. There's, say, for instance, very quickly, there were lots of people in disability who were like, we can't have sex because I can't move my hands. And you go, oh my God, that's just crazy. And then you'd meet people like physios who were like, we don't have any products that might help somebody with pelvic floor pain. They're quite two different problems. So I just started trying to collaborate with people, because I think in this space, you would understand as industrial designers, we're not the subject matter experts. We're relying on somebody else to bring the subject matter, the content expert. We're trying to analyze what's important out of all of that and then coordinate with all the other technical parts of a team to get a good outcome. So that's when I started to discover that in the health field, there was just as much kind of, we don't want to talk about this stuff as there was out in the general public.
That's sad.
Talking about sexuality, yeah, crazy, because it's medical, right?
It's crazy. Who's going to know it if it's not them? We need somewhere in the world to be discussing this.
I mean, do you guys know the story of Dr. Helen Connell, who, let's say, I'll put in inverted commas, discovered the clitoris back in the 80s? She's an Australian urologist. She's very famous.
Tell us this story. I think I don't know it, and our listeners probably don't.
She's very famous. A nice circular thing she helped with the project we just won an Australian Design Award for, which is called Clitorit. I'll tell you what that is. So Dr. Helen O'Connell was a young med student. She was going to be a urologist, so she was doing her final kind of doctoral capstone project. She noticed in the medical textbooks, if she went and looked at a penis, it's like 5 volumes of, thousands of pages on the penis. And then if she went and tried to find something on the clitoris, she was just like, it was nothing. It was like, oh my God, it's half a page here. What's going on? And so she decided to make that her project. And she was like, nobody really knows what it is, right? Now people know what it is because of her work. So what she did was, I think she started to cut up cadavers. And in those days, it wouldn't even been probably scanning. It was probably drawing. So she went in there, and I've got a card. I'll show it up to the screen. But, the pink thing in the center of that, the wishbone, the wishbone shape of the clitoris, the bulbs that sit either side of the vagina, and only the little, the man in the boat that pokes out at the top of the clitoris. Prior to that, the medical textbook were like, oh, this is part of the urological system. So it wasn't even assigned to sexual functioning or sexual pleasure. Wow. So it's it really disappeared. They had a better understanding in the Renaissance. When people like Da Vinci were doing all those amazing, cutting up dead people and doing amazing anatomy drawings and all of that sort of stuff. They had a better idea of then. And then just through that kind of overlay of Judeo-Christian, the way that the religion has sort of intersected with the way that we live our lives for thousands of years, and how that just kind of gets tighter and tighter for women up to the Victorian era. And literally, tighter as in literally you're in a corset.
The corsets, yeah.
The Victorian era. And funnily enough, everybody has hysteria. And that became an interesting part of my thesis, because it's like, well, and I love that term hysterical. I've got a T-shirt. I wear it, walk around the place that says hysterical. And it's a really, when somebody says to a woman, oh, you're hysterical, like it's so loaded, as in, well, what? A woman can't get angry or be outlandish or whatever, or be loud or whatever, particularly angry. Women are not supposed to be angry. For thousands of years, there's been this idea around hysteria, and it becomes pathologized by the Victorian era. But when you actually go back and you look at the way that it was listed, says a woman can be horny, a woman can be frigid, she's got pain, she's taking on fluid, she's having headaches, she's feeling tired. And I'm like, that's just our monthly cycle. It really was just describing us as the way that we have this hormonal kind of roller coaster across a month,
Sure.
particularly when we're young. So it became this catch-all for everything. And then funnily enough is you could go, if you're a middle-class woman or an upper-class woman, you could apparently go off to a hysteria clinic and you could have what was called your vulva massaged to what was called paroxysm, which is really orgasm. And effectively it was like they were massaging your vulva and your clitoris and you were having an orgasm. And you were coming out of that clinic feeling great. And of course you were good because you never got cured from hysteria, right? And then so you went back the next month. And apparently that is the beginnings of the technological side of vibrators being involved, because there is a time there where I think it's Dr. Butler invents their first electromechanical. They were steam-driven, steam-powered, and then they were electromechanical.
Wow.
Because it's taking them too long to massage the women. Obviously, they didn't quite know how to do it right, but I'd say it wasn't a pretty sexy environment, right?
Yeah.
You know what it's like to go get a pap smear, right? It's not a very sexy environment. And then that's when the vibration came into it. And that was kind of the start of what I can tell of the first vibrators. And it is pretty hard to track that sort of period between late Victorianism through to, say, probably the 60s, where the porn industry really gets involved in making them, and taking them on as a product category, which was a byproduct category of the video, the porn industry. And where they became really important was as you get up to the end of the 20th century, when the internet came and kind of took away their business model for making porn movies, because now you just get on Pornhub, right? Or get on anywhere and you can find some porn. They lost all their IP and that whole business model collapsed. And so then they were like, oh, well, actually, we've got this other thing that we can be doing. And it's selling these type of sexual products.
Okay, so they had a big gap basically in their market and an easy way to move it forward.
What happened was they bought all their old baggage.
Yeah, they're not actually doing good research. They're just sort of promoting the exact same ideas, right? From the porn videos.
So every woman wants a phallus and she's going to dress up as a naughty nurse or a slut or something like that. So they bought all their old tropes along with them. So instead of just going, okay, at that particular point, like a lot of industries in the 70s and 80s made a genuine attempt to find out what women wanted, like the car industry, and to bring women into those industries as designers and engineers and marketing people and the business side of it. The porn industry didn't. And I guess part of that is because it's a marginalized industry. I mean, they brought women in to be porn stars and, and all of this sort of stuff. Like if you went to any of the industry events, it's very obvious the way that women were expected to look and behave, as opposed to the way men in the industry ran the industry. They were the business people. They were the entrepreneurs. Women were the
porn
product
were just,
or content.
They were products too. They were objects.
Yeah. So they bought that whole culture. So a big part of my thesis was going, look, this is the culture of the adult industry, and this is the culture of industrial design, as in this is our professional practice culture. And you need to kind of get away from this sort of culture. But we would like to say that if we're given a brief for a job, we try to take an objective view about who it's for, particularly if you're doing research from scratch inside a university. You're meant to not, have a bias around what you're doing. Sometimes in industry, the marketing department comes and slaps down already who's it for, and you don't kind of get to investigate that too much.
Yeah, so it sounds like the, let's say, medical sex toys industry, it started on the good foot, right? It was used to help people. It wasn't that bad, right? It was beginning, right? Hysteria, maybe not ideal, but porn came later and basically trashed it.
Yeah, but what I say is that the industrial design field abdicated the field.
Yeah.
Like the big product design companies weren't there. So porn just filled a gap, right?
So why do you think that happened? How did designers start to think of those products as off limits for us? Or why do you think there was this big detachment between our industry and that product area?
Well, we're saying, we're in 2024 and we're saying people still have trouble discussing this stuff.
Yeah.
So imagine going back to the 1950s or 60s, because it was only men at the table. Can you imagine sitting around a meeting at Braun or something like that, and they're discussing new product categories? There would have been no women at the table. It's been a very long time. It's taken women to get to the table.
Absolutely. I guess I'm surprised that they weren't at least making sex toys that suited men. It feels weird that the whole area got skipped, even if they weren't very good at understanding female pleasure or needs. I guess it's maybe because men don't as often need as much support with their pleasure.
Well, they do after 50. They need a lot of support.
Fair.
The stats are 50% of males at 50 will have erectile dysfunction problems, 60% at 60, 70% at 70. So that outlier where, the dude's in his 80s or 90s and your father's a kid is very much an outlier and more urban myth than anything else. Again, I think it just comes back to, like, I've been an atheist all my life, right? And I'm quite comfortable with that. But it's probably not that common, and particularly in America, it would be even more uncommon. Most people in America say that they're Christians or there's some other denomination. In Australia, it's pretty much split 50-50. I think 50% of Australians are like, no, we're atheists or agnostic or something like that. I don't think you can underestimate that kind of the grip of the sort of Christianity on the way that people have lived their lives for thousands of years, and what it meant to be a good person. If you go back 50 or 60 or 70 years ago, most people are still going to church on Sundays. So you really have to kind of look at that overlay of what was Christianity saying about sexual practice. It was sort of like women don't have abortions, sexual practice is just for procreation. I mean, we know that's a whole load of rubbish. I just don't think people wanted to I think people were very uncomfortable bringing up this kind of conversation.
Sure.
Even when Philips did that product, which is now going back to probably 20 years ago, there was a lot of consideration in the company for how that would look. They've got a lot of shareholders, they've got a lot of stakeholders, how that would actually look. And that's why I think they kind of
lobbed it.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing that you're kind of implying that maybe people who would work on these products would maybe not realize that they felt like they'd be a bad person morally if they worked on sex products, doing anything related to sex.
Oh, just imagine bringing up the concept of it around a table of, like back in the 50s or the 60s.
That like maybe you were being perverse or something.
Well, yeah, you're being perverse, you're being degenerate. And also, like, I don't think you can underestimate also that there's a relationship between Christianity and what they call the anthropomorphic idea of sexuality, which is male penis.
Yeah.
And the porn industry typifies that. Everything starts and stops with the male erection and the ejaculation, so it's all orientated towards male pleasure.
Yeah.
So who really validates these products? Like, you're saying essentially that at every step of the way, the consumer, the company, and the people that the company hires to make these products, at that time, they're all men. Like, the porn industry is run by men. The people who are making products are men. And that the consumer that they focused on were men, and these were the people that spent the money. Whose court is the ball in to kind of say a product is going to work, is going to be made, is going to be a success? Is it the consumers when they spend their money? Is it the companies when they build out a strategy for their business and say, we're going to make this product? Or is it the people who are going to work on those products? Or is it some conjunction thereof?
Yeah, I think probably in a contemporary sense, I mean, it should be a bit of everything, really. If you're going to invest in creating a bunch of products and a company, or you're going to go and get investment from somebody, then, you should definitely do your consumer research. As designers, we know that there is sometimes, and again, the story of or myth of Apple saying, well, we don't run focus groups because consumers don't know what they want in the future. And I kind of get that as a designer. Sometimes you're like, well, if I want to create something that's a bit different, maybe it's not worth. But you can still ask somebody again around those values of what are you looking for in a product? I want reliability. I don't want anything pornographic. So there was an English company that did a lot of consumer research into this, again, in that early part of it. It's deeply embedded in my thesis. I can't remember the name of it. They did some really, really great consumer research. And at that particular time, because there was a sense in that first, when I started Golf Route, there was a sense in that first, Lilo started, Jimmy Jane started. There are a bunch of other companies that were started by designers and engineers. WeVibe started.
Sure.
And we didn't know each other, right? We were going, oh, hey, we'd all met at uni or whatever. And I was like, okay, so part of my thesis came around, well, why is now the time that this is happening? So what has changed? Because, you cannot discount the socio-cultural systems that sit around any product, Out of my thesis, if you track that from Victorianism through to the first decade of the 20th century, sex toys become these indicators of sexual freedoms. Who makes them? it's an interesting technology story, but it's also because technology becomes this gateway to free designers like us to make the things that we want, right? To make niche products. Part of that simply came because of the internet happening. And so I can find a global audience, I can find a niche global audience, and I can sell through the internet. And women can sit at home and look through the internet without going into a dodgy old sex store, right? So back in the day when I first started looking at stuff, you actually went to a dodgy old sex store. The changes in technology become really, really interesting, but it's always mixed with sociocultural overlays and anything to do with female gender or sexuality or non-white male gender and sexuality, anything to do with that. There's always a sort of a push for us to have more freedoms and then a pushback.
I'm really glad that you brought up these companies because I was going to ask you about that too. It seems like there has been a small explosion of people that are working in this area.
Yeah.
And do you think that it is also sort of like a cascade effect where now that it's becoming a more safe endeavor to take on and, you know, you don't get backlash, more people are diving in?
Yeah. And I think because of the internet, you can find your global audience. And you don't necessarily have to go like when I first started back in that mid part of the first decade of the 20th century, I was still going, oh, do I have to go off to the AVN, the big porn shows in Las Vegas? It was still like, do I have to try and get my products on the shelves of these big box sex stores?
Right.
What happened at the same time was a whole bunch of women from a marketing business side jumped into the market and created either bricks and mortar stores or online stores for women. And there's a really interesting book by Lynn Camella called Vibrator Nation, which tracks, she's a fantastic academic out of, I think it's University of Las Vegas or something like that. And she tracks that history from those original feminist, queer-run collectives, pretty much out of California, Good Vibes, those sort of businesses, and the impact that they had. And in that day, you know, you kind of had to go to the store, but you'd get good advice, right? People could talk to you about your body or your practice or that sort of stuff. So they became these models for how you could run a female-centric plus kind of store. And that kind of exploded at that time too. It's very disconcerting if you go to, if you've never used a sex toy and you go to try and find one, God, where do you start? Like there's gazillions of them, right?
Right.
I would always say to somebody, try and find a store, either bricks and mortar in your town or online that is one of these sort of kind of female orientated stores, and go, if you can, go and talk to them and see the products, feel them, hear them, talk to them about what the sensation is, all of that sort of stuff. Because a lot of them are made with quite small kind of high frequency stingy motors and doesn't do anything for me, don't like them. And I kind of think that'd be a shame if you got the wrong kind of product your first time. But I know people that really like that sensation, and they're not necessarily cheap either. You know, you could be spending a couple $100 or $100 to $200 to try something. So getting some good advice. I always say if somebody, over the years, I've had lots and lots of people get in contact and just say, oh, look, you know, I'm a female entrepreneur up in Singapore or something. I want to start a shop up there. My husband's going to back me. What should I do? Where should I start? And I say, well, look at this model. You know, try as much stuff as you can and develop a curated collection. You know, the consumer's coming to you for advice. They don't want to see 50 million billion things. They want to see what you think. You become the expert. What do you think is a really good product? So what do you think is the best G-spot vibrator? What do you think is the best shafts vibrator? What do you think is a great dildo? You know, what do you think is a good cock ring? All of these, you can break most of the categories down into different things and just put that up there. And if you genuinely think they're really good products and state why you think they're really good products, if people start buying them and they find that they are, they'll come back. They'll be repeat consumers.
So I think this is kind of an interesting dive into accessing the available market. Like people who are already like looking for a sex toy and just don't have that hang up of like purchasing something for their sex life, even conversing with someone at a store about it. But like, what is the designer's role in converting the market? Like, are the people out there who are still too prudish, too afraid to talk about taboos or whatever, is there things that we do through our products that help with that?
Well, I mean, a big part of the shift in that the design-led companies that started by industrial designers or involved industrial designers properly in proper R&D processes, a big part of that period was then taking these literal interpretations of genitalia out of the products. So one of the key classic tropes, you know, and I mentioned it, the Doc Johnson six-inch dong was a literal interpretation of a penis, somebody out there. It probably actually was a cast, and then they just made a silicone mold and they banged it out of a garage somewhere in California, in LA somewhere. They've made millions of those things. Like, it's incredible. Wouldn't it be amazing to know whose actual penis it was?
That person's proud. They know.
And that person would probably be like, I wish I had, 20 cents. Forever. I should have signed the contract. Which
Yes,
said, give me
Some
20
royalties.
The royalties.
Residuals.
The
It's
royalties.
somebody's ex-boyfriend, and that's how they got back at them.
Oh, I wish it was like an ex-girlfriend actually selling the rights and actually
Oh, did I answer your question, Ginger? What I'm saying is that era was about taking out that pornography part of it, that element, and turning them into not desexualized products, but things that kind of looked more like normal products, right? You know, like if your mum came into your bedroom and you had your little vibrator on the table, she wouldn't, these days, she'd probably think it was a vape, right?
Yes.
What are you vaping
Some of
for?
them.
No, mum, it's a vibrator. Oh, that's fine.
That's a nice chat. I hope that happens.
Okay, so I see what you mean, that like physically through the form giving, removing past baggage, removing problems.
Yes, so it's that meaning that's inherent in objects. And I mean, sometimes when I give talks on this, my first slide in a lecture theatre will be, and it's blown up like 20 feet because you're on a big screen, and it will be a big dong.
Amazing.
And be like, well, like in your face. But I mean, like it's completely obvious. For a lot of women, get that form factor, or get that, not even the form factor, because the shaft is potentially not a problem, right? But, maybe there's a lot of women that don't necessarily want that literal interpretation of genitalia. I suspect that for some men and women, I suspect for a lot of guys, there is a kind of a visceral, I see a pair of boobs, I see a vagina, and there's a visceral reaction. I think for women, a lot of the time there's something else going on. You've kind of got to get into bed. You've kind of got to get a fantasy going, and it can get very involved and you can get very sidetracked, but eventually you get back to the point, and it's almost like you're writing an erotic novel in your head before you actually get to the sex bit. I'm not saying for all women, but I think for women, there's something else going on beside just a visceral, I look at that inanimate object and suddenly I'm horny. Whereas for a lot of guys, they can actually do that. It's quite amazing.
I think we started talking about something very interesting, which is manufacturing of sex toys. Like you mentioned, the literal dong could not be probably it is mass manufactured, but like again, you need silicone to like remove it from mold because the veins do the undercuts. I think it's interesting how it's good to develop forms and like think how it's manufactured, all the safety measures, and also how can you enable young designers to be able to experiment with it and like maybe come up with their own product, how they can understand the manufacturing.
Yeah, I think, again, those classic techniques that we use at uni, that you guys get taught, which is product teardowns, get a product, pull it apart. I've got one of the guys in the workshop at uni. He always gets excited when I'm like, I'm bringing a whole bunch of sex toys to cut in half because we're doing a project and we kind of want to see the construction. That's a really classic technique. The fantastic thing these days is, 3D printing allows us to mock up and produce prototypes and working prototypes in ways, or molds for things like silicone molding and all sorts of stuff, in ways that we couldn't do. Like when I went through ID back in the late 90s, we were still in the workshop laboriously making models to say, hey, this is the product I'm trying to sell you. These days you either do a fantastic rendering with an animation fly through, whatever, explode the thing, whatever, or you actually use 3D printing as part of a iterative process of product development, which is fantastic. And then other things like, even just to get form factors and stuff, even just using things like plasticine or foam or shaping foam just to get things that you might hold in your hand, all those classic techniques that you learn 101 design school, first year studio, user-centered design studio kind of stuff. Most sex toys aren't that technologically whiz-bang. They're kind of similar to an electric toothbrush. They've got a shaft with an off-centric motor that creates the vibration. There's a great little company out there, well, it's probably a fairly big company, but in the UK called Precision Motors. They're really helpful. They explain all the different types of motors, what you might want. I think they supply a lot of vibrator motors for the industry.
Cool.
You can buy lots of different, so if you want to try different styles of motors to see what would give a different effect on different things, you put a high-frequency motor in a kind of a hard clamshell construction, even if you put a layer of silicone over the top, you're going to get a really stingy vibration. You put a stronger, more lower frequency motor in more of a solidy silicon kind of construction, and you're going to get a stronger but a softer vibration, which is much more applicable, I think, to more people. But there is no real research out there in that sort of stuff. What kind of sensations or vibrations do women want? A big problem in the industry is when somebody comes up with something new, then other companies steal it. So recently I was involved in a case where I was asked to look at some IP stuff around one big sex toy company was suing another big sex toy company for a patent infringement on one of those types of vibrators which do the sucking.
Yeah.
You know, that they have the little
Suction.
little
There's
hole.
suction.
Suction.
Yeah, suction toys or something.
Suction vibrators.
Yeah.
The hilarious thing was that the company that was suing the other company had been sued by another company, you know, like all the way down the chain to the original company that had kind of started it. So I just said to the lawyers, like, why don't you get the designer in the room and say, did you do a product teardown? I mean, have you copied this? And they're like, oh, no, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. We have to argue through the patents. And I'm like, oh, okay. But I know what happened.
What?
The design team did a product teardown of their competitor's product and then said, how can we just adjust this by the amount that we can get away with, that then we can put it on the market? And then they get the tick off from upstairs. Yeah, we'll take the risk on that. And it happens. It's not just sex toys it happens in. I mean, Dyson's the classic. We all know the story. I mean, apparently the myth is that he made more money out of suing other companies for infringing on that cyclonic engineering design, which might be true. But yeah, it's a problem in the sex toy industry because it kind of, I think it stifles R&D. Nobody really wants to put the effort into it. But having said that, there is a lot of, so going back to that question, Mark, about what can people do or what can young designers do, there is still, you know, there's the mass production side of ID where you kind of need a fair bit of coin, right, to get something out there. But there's also the batch production side of industrial design. So you might be using all those great tools, you know, like your CAD tools and your tools to be able to send that CAD to different machines and whatever and understand all of that. But you're using processes that are anywhere between, you know, batch production to hand production. So that's where I started Goldfrau back in the early 2000s. One, I wanted to make a dildo out of porcelain because I just thought this is a fantastic material. It's super strong, right? I actually made it thicker than I had to because I needed to give people a sense of this is strong enough, right? I could have made it half as thick. It's got all those lovely connotations of eroticism and those lovely connotations of beautiful, you know, hundreds of years of beautiful porcelain. And then you've got the ability to overlay ornamentation and decoration and colour, which you don't get in many material and process categories. You know, in ID, you don't kind of get that like complete, like, wow, you can kind of almost do whatever you want with it. And, you know, that's batch production. So there's trade-offs with it. Obviously, your setup, your molds are cheaper, whatever. But then to make, you're doing lots of hand processes and hand finishing. And then so your labor's higher. But if you wanted to get a product out there, start a brand, try and start a brand, then you can test some things in those material categories where you can do batch production, glass or wood or metal. It's a great company. I think it's out of New York. It's called Enjoy. They've been going for like 30 years now. They do metal dildos, you know, and they do them really well. They just hit on something that they set up their processes. They continue to do it. They probably find they make enough money out of it. And again, in that area, you could, like, if I didn't want to be an academic, I could just be making ceramic dildos all day, which would kind of drive me crazy. But drive me crazy because I like to do lots of different things. But if you wanted to set up a company and just get a production line happening and pump some stuff out, there's plenty of stuff people can do. Making, and, you know, like for female designers and queer designers and trans designers, like making is empowering. When you put that product out there into the market, you are putting, you know, a whole bunch of messages out there. And with my product, what I was trying to do was to say, by using a material and process which has connotations of exquisiteness and quality, I was trying to say, look, that's what I believe about female sexuality. Female sexuality is important, it's strong, it's exquisite, it's beautiful. Nobody's stopping you. I put that out there. That will always be out there. I don't sell those products, but those ideas still are circulating around in the world. So long after you kind of stop potentially manufacturing something, your ideas are still circulating and they potentially have a knock-on effect to somebody else to say, hey, that's a great exemplar. Somebody did that. I'm going to have a crack. And making is really, really powerful. And I encourage anybody in industrial design who's interested in this area to give it a crack.
That's great. I love this encouragement towards like a entrepreneurial mindset for this category of products. With that in mind, like with all of these really incredible values that you're proposing people could infuse into society through these products, we kind of wanted to ask, perhaps these entrepreneurial people are going to follow these steps you proposed and try to show the world that female sexuality is wonderful, it's beautiful, it's empowering. What are some pitfalls that you see that people could fall into while they're pursuing this that they need to watch out for?
I think it's the same. It's exactly the same. I mean, it's manufacturing, right? It's manufacturing and it's business and it's commerce. So at the end of the day, it is just another product category. So I think it's similar pitfalls to trying to start up anything, which is how do you grow? So you might get your first product out there on the market and you might find it makes you a certain amount of money. But then say you want to go, I want to go from a ceramic dildo to I want to make a vibrator. I need much more investment for that. I might need $100,000 or more or something. I find the pitfalls are that then in this product category, when you try to go for investment, the only people that are interested are people like who are in the porn industry, right? And so again, you're then probably coming up against somebody that has different values. So very similar to one of my really good friends here is a feminist porn maker, and she talks about trying to get money out of the Australian porn industry, like 20 years ago to make feminist porn. And they were like, who'd want to see that?
Oh, no.
Their idea of feminist porn was probably two blonde women with big boobs in a room together. That was probably their idea of feminist porn. But and it's a bit like that. You might be trying to, the person you're trying to get investment off might not have the same values as you do. So then trying to use those mechanisms of crowdsourcing might be a better way to go. You're saying, this is what I want to do, and you're putting it out there, and are people buying back in? It's not easy to expand your business. And I have seen over and over again companies that started out great values, really good companies. And then, like a couple of years down the track, I'll flick onto their website and I'll be like, why have they done that? And I'm thinking, they went for investment. They went for investment and somebody's turned around and said, yeah, you can have the money, but you got to make this type of product, which I call them the usual suspects. It's a stock standard kind of sex toy, like a bunny, like a rabbit, or a lipstick or something. And yet they started their company with these really great innovative stuff. And then you go, oh no, they've gone and got investment. And somebody's made them do that.
Is it adding to portfolio? No gap in portfolio.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's just, there is a portfolio gap if you don't have a lipstick. So even if you have better things to do, like at some point lipstick needs to end up being there.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's depressing.
And I have seen people try and do interesting versions of things like the rabbit. And I just think the rabbit's just a rubbish product from the get-go.
Wow.
Why?
Wait, yeah, tell us why.
I always think that like I would never got the rabbit because I think it's like not minimalist. I don't like all the things that are going on there.
Yeah, well, there you go. You answered it. You answered half the question yourself.
I don't even know if it works because I was like, I'm just no.
It's overwhelming to you immediately.
It's a really good example of how the industry operates or has operated from sort of the 70s through. You get these product typologies, and the rabbit became a really famous one because of Sex and the City, right? That episode of Sex and the City, Charlotte gets addicted to the rabbit.
Yes, when they were taking it from Charlotte, yes.
And then everybody went out and bought a rabbit, right? And then the industry went, it's the biggest selling sex toy in the world, Sarah. Then everybody went out and bought more rabbits because they were like, well, everybody's buying rabbits, so I'm going to buy a rabbit, right? And then they probably all got stuffed in cupboards or landfill. And so it kind of really shat me because I was like, why didn't you put my dildo on Sex and the City?
Yeah, did they like pay for that? How did they get that placement, honestly?
They probably just they didn't even think about it. They probably just sent the runner down to a sex shop and said, just grab something, they were all gay writers anyway, Darren Starry's mates. They were just like, just go and get something, and they pulled back a rabbit, right? They wouldn't have been thinking about what was good about female sexuality. It was just a storyline. They would have had no idea how it would have taken on this kind of viral moment before social media and stuff. So why is it bad? Okay, so they were created historically, I think probably back in the 60s and 70s out of Japan, in the day where for those companies to export, they had to turn them into they couldn't have a penis, right? So they had to turn it kind of into something that was kind of like an animal.
Cute.
Or they put a face on it. It was really weird.
So weird. So much weirder.
Yeah, weird category. And if you know about Japanese design, there's that whole, kawaii animism part of it, which is fun and interesting. But then put it combined with a cock and it just gets really super weird. And then just even functionally, like, so the cock, which is enormous, right? I mean, let's talk about it. It's a big cock. So there'd be a small section of women that would like cocks that big.
Sure.
Then it's too long. So even if you could handle the girth, the length is too long. Like if you were using it as it was intended, which was to insert it, and then while you're inserting it, it's then starting to go in that centric motion, which would just be super weird, right? While then you're trying to get it right. And I don't even know if your vagina's long enough, right, to get it right down there. So you can get like the little clitoral bit onto your little bunny bit onto your clitoris, right? And even if you could get the bunny bit onto your clitoris, you're being so distracted by this giant thing inside you going around in a circular motion.
It's like you got an amusement park ride that was just like way too crazy and you got sick.
Yeah. So it's so many different levels. I've often go, I've really got to write a paper on that, like, or give a conference paper on that, because it says so much about the sex toy industry. But what the sex toy industry does is it spawns a product category that then everybody follows. Like, what was the term, Marg, you used? You've got to have that in your portfolio, right? So you've got to, so everybody's got to have a bunny. Everybody's got to have a power wand. So the Hitachi magic wands spawned the power wand market. And that's another product that really gives me the yips, because it's totally not, well, Betty Dodson used to push it. So Betty Dodson was the age and sexuality. She's still around. She's a fantastic age and sexuality advocate, educator. And she would always say, ladies, post-menopause, get yourself a Hitachi magic wand, get yourself a power wand. But I think they're so heavy. I don't know if you've ever held a Hitachi.
Yeah, and it has like cable attached in the like, because it's so powerful. It's so powerful. It needs to have cable, because like the amount of energy it consumes, you could be mining Bitcoins.
Yes. And so that whole idea of that sort of foam head, it's like a ram drill, you know, and it's just going like that, and it's noisy and it's heavy. I'm going, for an old lady, no way you can lift it and get into position. So that spawned the power wand market, and they did kind of sort of try and then shrink them and whatever. They're still heavy. I still think they're completely the wrong idea for post-menopause. Having a powerful motor is correct, but encasing it in lots of silicon, so you're getting a powerful vibration through, dispersed through. It's a very simple concept, dispersed through that soft silicon, and you don't need a very big product. You could actually have that in something that's sort of, you know, the size of a big orange or something like that, you know, so you could have a completely different ergonomic thing going on.
Right.
The market spawns these types, and then people just keep repeating them, and they were never right in the first place. They've come out of porn industry, and they've come out of these sort of weird mashups and tropes, weird ideas, and, you know, weird ideas about women, and no research on our bodies. Nothing. There's nothing ergonomic about anything. It's so crazy. And then something like the Sex and the City moment happens, and it just all blows up into this sort of cultural phenomenon. And what women say to me is like, oh, I don't use the shaft bit. I just turn it over and I use the clitoral device. But you could have just bought a clitoral device, right?
Right. And you only find that out once you already own it, and then you're realizing how impractical it is. I think it says a lot to like even the way that we're able to educate ourselves on these products. It's like, okay, how do I sift through all of the marketing and info? Thank you for breaking down those two products for us. That's really fun. And I bet you just saved some people some time and money, honestly.
Yeah.
We have one fun question that I would just want to add on as we wrap up, which is, we have decided that Dieter Rams' 10 commandments of design are like great, but a little outdated. And so for third season, we really want to get all of our amazing women and non-binary guests to give us what they would add as their rule if we're making a new set of rules for the like modern day designer to factor in.
I don't think I can remember what Dieter Rams. Do I need to know what Dieter Rams 10 commandments?
It's like good design is as little design as possible. You know, just simple concepts.
Simple and elegant.
Really.
I agree with that. I agree with that. Simple and elegant. And I think with sex toys, you shouldn't over-define the ergonomics. Again, because it's only going to suit then a small amount of people. I'm going to be wrong for everybody else. Can you go through them? I'll tell you whether I agree with them.
Oh, yes, I can. I have them open.
Okay, Margaret, go for it.
Good design is innovative. Good design makes product useful. Good design is aesthetic. Good design makes product understandable. Good design is unobtrusive. Good design is honest. Good design is durable. Good design is consequent to the last detail. Good design is eco-friendly. Good design is as little design as possible.
I would agree with all of that sort of stuff.
Of course.
What would you add to it?
We're making updated rules for 2024. Yeah.
Yeah, you can pick one and change it too.
Well, when you think about like that, Dita Rams was operating in kind of like the epoch of mass manufacture. And I think these days, we just had a discussion about the tools that are available to people, prototyping, and you can make your own stuff, you can do your own batch production, and the internet means you can find your own global markets. So I think there's got to be something in there about diversity. What he's talking about is that there is good design clearly understands that consumer demographic or psychographic that you're designing for. And I think it goes back to what I was saying, that era of blokes sitting around a table designing for women. So what I might add is good design doesn't assume what women want.
Cool.
Good designers ask, good designers test, good designers validate. So I think that's really important. Everything that he's talking about is almost, in a sense, the way something has functioned and those beautiful details of design for manufacture, right? That we all love from Braun. We're going back talking about the shaver. I think there was a lot of assumptions across the last 50 years. And you guys know, working in product design, that how little all the female industrial design students that we pour out of universities, a small smidge, like 20% at the most, go into product design. And then a lot of you are then working in companies where you're dealing with layers of management and you're being told who you're designing for. Sometimes you might have good systems and sometimes you think, oh, no, that's rubbish, So we know that there's so much crap design out there because not enough is asked about the consumer or the user before the product gets put on the market. So I think, good design asks and questions before good design does anything. I think there's a lack of just stop, ask. There's so much technology looking for an application. I see it in university all the time because I'm dealing with all the other parts of the university in health and STEM. And somebody's like, I've got this great. And you're like, yeah, but what? What would you use that for? And they're like, well, you're the designer. You tell me. There's so much of that. What we're able to do now inside the university is with the people in the STEM side of it and health that we're starting to collaborate is get to the table really early in the process, even now while they're writing the grants, and shove in a whole bunch of consumer information like surveys before they do the research about how people feel about this potential innovation. Because sometimes with health innovation, they're really crazy and people are like, whoa, I don't know if I want my preemie baby to have stem cells. And you're like, well, if it means your baby's going to grow up to be normal, do you want it? Okay, all right, yep, I'll have that. But, it sounds really crazy, right?
Yeah.
I don't want, and you're thinking all the worst kind of things, like they're going to cut your baby's head open. It's just like, no, we're just going to put a little drip in your baby's nose and it's going to help it grow up to be almost normal. That's where design is good and can come in and explain things to people. But yeah, I would say there's still this technological push to innovation. Technology is driving the innovation. And it's like, do people really need it or want it?
Totally.
And part of that is just that companies need to keep creating products. And I think that's a big problem too. You need to always be perceiving to put something new out there on the market. I don't know how you distill that down into a point, but I would say good design asks the hard questions early.
Yeah, that's great.
Love it.
It's going to be exciting to put together our list.
New list.
Kind of commandments as we go through the season. Yeah. Great. Well, as we wrap up, just love to always ask the guest if you want people to be able to find your products, your work, reach out to you or any of that.
Yes. So I'd just like to give a shout out to a fantastic project. They can find this project on the internet. It's called Cliterate. So cliterate.com.au. So CLITERATE. Cliterate, as in be literate about your clitoris. And this was a fantastic it's a teaching tool. It's an education tool. It's essentially an anatomy device for teaching health professionals about female sexual functioning. Cool. So instead of like just getting a big torso where you've got organs and guts and veins and, all sorts of stuff, we just narrowed it down to what were the absolute basics and to a really lovely spherical object that you pull the layers off and you go down through into the body. We entered it in the Good Design Awards, which is the premier Australian Design Awards. Very funny story, and I think it still shows that we've got a long way to come, but somehow we got booted out of the research category and they pushed us into this product design category called sports and lifestyle. which I believe they put all, if they get, yeah, I know, weird, right?
What?
I was like, why didn't you put us in scientific and medical? But anyway, and then because sports and lifestyle, it's where they put the sex toys. If they ever get a sex toy enter, it's where they put the sex toys. So they were kind of like, they really didn't.
Or
It's a
I mean,
sport.
it's good to know if you feel bad about not doing sport.
Well, then I went to have a look, right? And I was like, okay, I drill down through the website, click. And then I went, because I know, like, it's like a hoverboard that won this year, like that had Mark Newsom's name on it. You know, there's bike lights, there's
Sure.
climbing gear, there's all the usual, like you'd think, sports categories. And I'm thinking, wow, clitoris going to look really weird in the middle of that. I want to see it. So then I went in there. Anyway, they've created a separate category for us on the website. We're in our own little sports and lifestyle. They should have just, I don't know what that. I wrote to them and
So
just said, oh,
weird.
come
Oh,
on.
they're so uncomfortable.
I said, well, come on, what decade are we in? I didn't hear back. I thought, oh, well, whatever. But anyway, yeah, look, we've still got a long way to go. So I think just as women and queers and others, look, I've lived 55 years and there was always this assumption that progress would go forward and we've seen it not. And I think we have to be vigilant and I think we have to,
Right.
people go, well, what can I do? And I think just be as authentic as you can about who you are and take up space. And that means as a designer too, take up space, get your stuff out there. I'm a big believer in the personal is political.
That's so true.
Love that point. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Glover. I think this has been great.
Thank you. Look, I think what you girls do is fantastic. Thank you for like focusing on female designers and
Thanks.
because there's so much great work that gets done out there in the world. Like the person is not Patricia Aquella, you know, it's like we don't know who they are. Inside companies, we're anonymous. Inside universities, there's so much amazing work that gets done out there. So the more that we can create a visible, and again, it's part of that thing of holding that line. We need to take up space. We need to be visible, and you're doing that. And it's really great. So I think it's fantastic. Good on you. It's been a lovely talk.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Ray Season 3. You can find all our past episodes on beyondraypodcast.com. If you had thoughts about this episode, you can weigh in on our Instagram post at @wid_Seattle